currently there are no systems in place to monitor gender equity and distribution of land to women. Government is on record saying that they don't have figures, they don't have systems to measure land distribution and benefits to women. Also, it is generally the trend of how the commercial agriculture is made up out of males still dominate the commercial farming sector. Engagements, it's stakeholder engagement with government, the farmer representatives are mostly male. The main positions of farm worker positions on farms are male. So the question of women won't be addressed until women stand up together or stand united and bring the issue to the fore and lobby government. The same with farm workers. Farm workers for years have said that what they earn is too little, and there's no notice was taken of them until the farm workers strike. Now the farm worker issues are high on the agenda, but it's the issue of wage. So first, another type of massive protest must happen in farming communities where women speak out and say that the lack of access to land and tenure security is a major problem before government will act and really address that.
There is a document from the Land Bank addressing charges of financing emerging farmers, and the poster boy on the cover is in a way shows you who the implicit target of a lot of their funding is, but the real issue isn't in a way that it should have been a woman on the cover. The real issue is a very narrow idea of the models of farming that are seen to be viable and desirable. The reality is that most of the farmers in this country and most of the small farmers in this country are women, but they don't fit into the profile of what a promising would-be black rural capitalist looks to the land bank. In a way, it is an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude too small. And I think a lot of this is not to do with any sinister agenda. It is simply due to very deeply entrenched habits of thought and biases towards seeing large-scale agriculture as desirable, both in the history of the mainstream departments of agriculture and in the history of the ANC and the left, which had a long history of seeing collectivization and scaling agriculture as desirable. And that means the hundreds of thousands of women who have a small patch of land, who farm it industriously, even bringing some of it to market, have some goats on the side, etc. They are simply not seen as serious players. They're not seen as the kind of people who you can bankroll. And their credit needs are simply too small and short-term for the organizations of the land bank to even engage with. So we need, in a way, we need to really rethink. There was a wonderful talk by Rory Alcock at the Land Divider Conference last year, which was really, what is the imaginary of what a farmer is? What is a farmer? Is it this guy on a tractor, or is it this woman next to the road with some chickens and goats? Now, she's not even seen as a serious player. In a recent paper by John Sender, which is shortly to be published in JPS, he talks to, these are just people who happen to have a few chickens scratching around in the backyard. Yet, those are activities that are absolutely crucial to their livelihood. And here are people who are investing their labor time and their resources into making it work. And what we don't have is the imagination or the vision to see how policies can be shaped to support them. And I also think it's easy to point the fingers. Finding out how to actually do it and how to support small farmers in our current agri-food system is difficult. And it does not mean you should try to help them get onto the shelves of Woolworths. Connecting a very small farmer to Pick n Pay, Woolworths, ShopRite is rather like throwing them into a den full of pit bulls. They'll simply be torn apart. And I'm not saying this because I'm negative about supermarkets. It's a very, very rough world. But there are other opportunities. There are informal markets. There are small local retailers. 60% of our retail system is run by supermarkets, but 40% is not. So there are we recently did a survey of small farmers in partnerships across the country, and it was not a very comprehensive survey, but something like 80% of the farmers we found are small farmers loosely connected, sometimes bringing produce to a local informal market or a local retailer. But all the funding, all the attention, all the policy is going to support a tiny handful, 2,000 or 3,000 people, maybe 5,000, who could become the big farmers of the future. So it's a case of that is where the problem is, and the gender bias is in a way wrapped up with that bigger bias. One of my colleague Ben Cousin's research projects at the moment is about a small place called Tugela Ferry, which is an old, basically defunct Bantustan era irrigation scheme, which has sort of taken off recently agriculturally, partly because it has the earliest green maize in KwaZulu-Natal, and it's been discovered by the Bakkie traders of Vietnam and surrounding towns. And what has happened is not prosperity but economic agency, mostly women on tiny little patches of land, a quarter of a hectare, half a hectare, farming industriously, sometimes even employing farm labor, not very organically. They buy pesticides and fertilizer that is so goed gaan, but taking tons of maize and tomatoes out of that soil. And this is the point, without any significant government help whatsoever. In a way, if you wanted to make a neoliberal point, you could say, well, this is just shows you all you need is people close to a market. And there's some element of truth to that. What those women have is they have security of tenure. They have a patch of land that nobody else is going to contest their right to be at. They are close to a market, and they have some of the resources they need to produce. And they're going ahead without very much help from anybody. In our study of smallholder agriculture in partnerships with the private sector, we found we did a scan of all the schemes in the country. We found about 13,000 farmers. 2,000 of them are in partnerships with big, well-funded NGOs, are funded by the Land Bank, or on the schemes that you see on the cover of the Mail and Guardian or Farmers Weekly. The rest of them, 10,000 of those farmers, are people who are doing it without any government help whatsoever. They're simply farming on a piece of land that they have. They found a local supermarket. They got a handshake agreement, often not for very good prices, to bring the produce there. So I think the notion that our rural people lack agency or initiative, that they lack something that people in Mozambique or Zimbabwe is wrong. In a way, what there isn't is the spectacles to see the inventiveness and the agency and the resourcefulness of the rural black entrepreneurs that are on the land. And in a way, we want them to conform to some kind of other ideal before they are entitled to support and so on.
The Western Cape commercial farm area, the workers there have been historically farm workers, and some of them can trace their links to the slaves, which means that they don't qualify to apply for land restitution, because by 1913 they were workers on the farm, so they were not landowners at that stage. So that disqualifies them from applying for land claims. The farm workers that benefited from land reform was through these farm equity schemes and land redistribution. But where you had one farm, big commercial farm with one farm owner, you now see 150 shareholders that must all share from the benefits of that farm, and it's not economically viable. So what do these farm or these shareholders do? They continue on the farms that they historically worked, and on weekends, if they can, they will work at farms. So the farms go bankrupt, the land lays waste. So it's not the same. In Mozambique, the difference after liberation, the land was given to the people. So they don't have this long, difficult process in applying for land. And that's why people are much more prouder, and they work the land. They have their difficulties. On agency, women are more and more getting together and as a united structures, not only nationally but regionally. to learn from one another, so that South African women can see what are the success stories, best practices of Mozambican women, Malawian women. How do they save seeds? How do they make use of indigenous seeds and organic or agricultural agroecological practices? But also learn what are the challenges, how are the BRICS countries coming in, the Brazilians, how are the Chinese coming into Mozambique to rip their land, and also see that patterns in South Africa, see it in other countries, and how do women in Zimbabwe survive after the land reform? They've got land, but who controls the farmer union structures it's still the males. So
every pound that a British consumer pays for a bunch of table grapes, 20 pence goes to the farmer. 40 pence stays with the supermarket. That the farmer pays for everything on the farm. Electricity, tractors, fertilizer, his own salary, his kids' education, and the workers out of that 20 pence. The workers get about half of that 20 pence. They get 10 pence. But 40% is going to the supermarkets. And nobody is looking at the accountability of these organizations. When discussions are held about minimum wages, it's imagined to be a tripartite negotiation, labor, government and the employer. But the real actor in the scene is escaping accountability. So I think there is space for activism, there's space for asking questions that we are not currently doing. So I agree with you, if we didn't have capitalism, we probably or could possibly be a lot better. But given that we are now in a capitalist society, there are real threats, as Aninka has said, that need to be looked at, and there are real gains that can still be made.
A whole lot of women have said that because the customary terrain is so slippery, let's just leave that behind. Let's look at equality. Let's look at land rights being registered equally in men and women, because the customary terrain is always going to be dominated by male voices who exaggerate male power. The trouble is that change to stick needs to be negotiated from the bottom up, and the contexts in which women live their lives often have customary elements. And what we've seen is women working within that reality to make claims and to change things. And in a sense, we've also seen this kind of flowering of development committees, and we have seen an increase in the number of women traditional leaders. So I believe that customary land rights are crucial, particularly because the law prohibited black people from having ownership. So they don't have common law land rights, most people, and they don't have statutory rights. And customary law is recognized by the Constitution and provides an alternative basis for asserting those rights and getting them secured. So to me the tragedy is that we've seen these systems changing from within, but basically these new policies attack that process of change as something that's negotiated by all the actors in society, and they reassert this idea of unilateral chiefly control. So you've had the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act, which says that the old tribal boundaries will remain, but within a certain number of years, they must be transformed so that a third of the members of traditional councils are women and 40% are elected. That was passed in 2004. There have still been no elections in Limpopo. They are still not the required number of women all over the country. They have failed absolutely in a kind of top-down driven process, to the extent that they're now going to repeal the Framework Act and attempt to replace it with another law that wipes out their failure. So customary law has real transformatory potential if it can challenge the dominant versions of property rights in South Africa, which has been common law ownership, with deeply embedded African values of fairness, of prioritizing claims of need, of prioritizing those who've invested in the family. But government has turned its back on actually trying to infuse South African law with customary values. It's gone straight back to that old colonial version. action research unit. So we work quite closely with different CBOs and NGOs in identifying what the problem areas are and trying to come up with solutions. And in our understanding, what we really need is to move away from this idea of exclusive ownership, European style exclusive ownership being the model, and more to a system of relative rights as you have under customary systems. And in a way you can achieve some of that if we could force government to pass a law recognizing occupation and use rights and providing protections. There is such a law called the Intra-Protection and Informal Land Rights Act, which is not properly implemented. And what we are hoping to do is work with groups around pushing for that form of law reform.